Technical speaker of the day knows what it takes to turn a business idea into reality during hard economic times. John Seldon, C.E.T, holds a Master of Arts in Environmental Studies from the University of Waterloo and is a registered professional planner. John's career in the wastewater began in 1972, and he began dewatering residuals in 1983. In the midst of the 2008 economic recession, he started his company, OACETT, offering mobile dewatering services for liquid sludge and transporting the resulting sludge cake for appropriate disposal.
The late 1940s, I grew up with Diefenbaker and Pearson at the heart of Canadian government, and so to hear what the Diefenbaker is just phenomenal. Also, as a preteen, if that day ever was, I can remember my parents putting me on a train without parental concern and sending me to the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto on just a great train ride to Toronto. The only problem with that was they were always surprised when I came back. Anybody who doesn't think trains aren't relevant today hasn't listened to Warren Buffett, who bought one of the largest units in the United States and sees a great future for them. It was a great presentation, and I loved hearing about the Diefenbaker. It's just great to be here, and you know, the trains are great and the Diefenbaker is great, but there's nothing like sludge. He talks about, Ahmed talks about linear moment creep, I think it was, or linear creep moment, and I talk about percent total solids. What could be a better mix? Look, in 2007, things started getting bad for those of us who contract out. It got bad for a lot of people. And by 2008, March 2008, things were in pretty serious shape. I work as an independent contractor as well. And I had a good colleague, a good friend, and we got together and decided we'd set up the group that I'm talking about today. We can't set up a group without having an idea, and the first idea is a technical idea, and that's at the heart of virtually anything that's going to work or anything that's going to be used practically out there in the working field. And our idea was not new. I'd like to tell you it was new, but it's not new. Dewatering sludge has been going on for at least I don't know how many millennia, and if you want to talk about wine and wine presses, forever it's been going on. So it's not a particularly new idea in a lot of ways. But mobile systems really came about in the early 1980s in Ontario. And I was involved with that group, and Udo Seltner, my colleague, he and I worked together with that group, and we've worked together on and off ever since then. It's a neat idea, and essentially what you're doing is you're taking a 3% sludge, and I'm assuming you all know what sludge is. I'm assuming you read about it each day and keep up to speed, but what we primarily deal with are industrial sludges. So we end up with a lot of specialized sludges and a lot of specialized conditioning, but also municipal wastewater treatment plant sludges are very much the same way. And often we run into a sludge of about 3%, and it ranges from a very poor quality sludge at some locations of 0.5% up to much better sludges on the order of 5%. Generally, water is your enemy when you're dealing with a sludge, and you'd like to deal with something in the higher percent total solids. But one of the problems is that, particularly for industries, if they want to get rid of that sludge, and they have to eventually, it's an end product from, or waste product from the manufacturing process, they've got to get that liquid sludge down to a cake. Well, they don't have to, they can send it off as a liquid, but the cost of doing that can be very expensive. And the whole heart and soul of what we offer as a service is that if we can go in and take a cubic meter of sludge and reduce it down to you know, a tenth of that, or a little bit more, a little bit less, and they can haul away a cake, they've got a much lower disposal cost in the end. So the heart and soul, again, of offering what we do offer is that we can come in, do that work, and charge them, and they can save money overall from the cost of the disposal of the sludge. One of the other benefits to that is, as well, is that it's a safer transport, lower volume, better a cake than a liquid, easier cleanup in case there is an accident, and environmentally it makes good sense. You're all familiar with the Sarnia hazardous landfill site. If you're taking a cubic meter of liquid down there and they've got to treat it, you're going to end up with more than a cubic meter, and that's going to go into the landfill using up a lot of space. You take a tenth of a cubic meter down as a cake, and it's much easier to dispose of and much better from an environmental point of view. The second part of what this paper was about was the fact that not only we established the firm, but that we did it in a recession. And again, it's saving the money is the incentive for the client to make use of it. The recession was not our idea. As much as some Wall Street bankers may claim, the sludge industry did not have an influence on this whatsoever, but we felt the effects of it. But I'm going to back up and just give you a little bit of history. Graduated from the University of Guelph in 1972, I believe, and guess what? Walked into a recession. Couldn't find work to save my life. Overqualified and no experience. 72. Bad economic times between 76 and 80. If you remember, Mr. Carter was beaten by Mr. Reagan in the United States, in part because of his phrase, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And Mr. Carter went down, a very talented man, and Mr. Reagan came in. I won't comment on Mr. Reagan. Mr. Clinton went after Mr. Bush Sr. with the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." That's how he kept his political campaign focused when he was running against Mr. Bush. And now in 2008, thanks to, and I use the word advisedly, crooks on Wall Street, just about destroying the Western economy, we're into another crash. So in short, whether you're going to start up or not, you're going to run into a recession. I don't care. I've been working now 40 years, and I'm no economist. One of the dangers of somebody saying I'm no economist is they're always going to give you some profound economic statements, but I'll keep it as unprofound as possible. Over 40 years, I've seen at least 4 serious downturns. So even if you start up in good times, chances are if you're in your business long enough, you're going to run into recession, and you will get one. The other thing that was involved in getting this going was that my colleague asked me out to lunch, and whenever I'm at lunch, I'm in a weak moment, and I agreed to go ahead with this crazy thing. The other thing is the effect of work like this. I was 59 when we started this out in March 8th, literally March 8th, 2012, and for the record, I'm now 73. Business plan. There's really about 5 phases we work for. There's a million things you can talk about when you get into this, but I put up about 5 phases. Business plans. Business plans are an interesting thing, but in my opinion, and at the risk of sounding like I'm going to pontificate, I think they're absolutely essential if you're going to put a company together. It's one of those things that you need to do and sit down and think about what, in fact, you're actually going to offer. Udo and I have been doing dewatering sludges, either of static systems and optimizing other people's systems, or setting up and running a mobile system since the mid-1980s. We know a lot about the market. So the market wasn't a problem. We knew a lot of the established clients, so that wasn't a particular problem. But what was it that we were going to particularly deliver? And that's the real benefit to a business plan. The other thing is that if you're going to do a business plan, sit down and write it out. Don't make it up in your head. Don't write it on a napkin and have something fancy you can hand to your grandchildren 20 years from now or 30 years from now and say, well, that's where the plan came from. It isn't enough. You got to sit down, work it out, and write it up. And in fact, I did that. In fact, after our meeting on March the 8th, I can remember this very well, I said, all right, if we're going to do this, let's get the business plan done immediately. And I went back and drafted it and reviewed it with my colleague, and we came to an agreement as to exactly what it was we were going to offer. And one of the really key things about that was, whoops, how do we go back? One of the key things was we were going to focus on industrial sludges. Industrial sludges can be a bit more tricky just from the point of view that you've got a wide variety of them. If you're dealing with a municipal sludge, a municipal biosludge, particularly a digested, an anaerobically digested sludge as opposed to an aerobically digested sludge, when you're dealing with an industrial sludge, you've got to vary your polymer addition or your conditioning agents, or you're adding ferric chloride or aluminum sulfate ahead of that, depending on the sludge. There can be a lot more variability in it. However, in dealing with a municipal sludge, it's more consistent, particularly from the polymer addition point of view. But the problem for us was that there are a number of firms out there that also offer this service who are much larger than us. And when we have to bid on a municipal work, There are often bid bond requirements, there are performance bond requirements, all that kind of thing. And that kind of enormous financial drain on a tiny two-man company is very difficult. Whereas in the private sector, we are able to simply put in a proposal, indicate what we can do, and then we're accepted, rejected based on either previous performance or price. In the end, price does count for a lot, but if performance is not good, it won't get you the job the second time around. So industrial sludges. Now, to me, this is a thing of beauty, because this is money in the bank, right? This is work. This is a concrete, going back to the Beverly Hillbillies, this is the cement pond, at an industrial site in southwestern Ontario. And one small comment about clients. I mean, God loved clients. I mean, without them, we have nothing, right? So that's great. But the one thing that I've learned, if I've learned anything about dealing with a client and their sludge, is A, they don't know what their volume is, B, they don't know what their percent total solids is. And if we've gone back to a client 10 times, they'll give you 10 answers and never will they be correct. I do not mean to make fun of them, but people don't get in their waders or get out in their boats or get their sludge judges out or do anything they really need to do to actually find out what's in there. So often it's a real surprise. And in fact, this shot was taken last fall, and we were called in to get it done. They were getting really concerned because nobody had actually done this site for some time, and we were told that they had about 120 metric tons dry solids. We generally deal in dry solids when we're dealing with a sludge, and when we finished the job, we'd done about 30 metric tons dry solids. That's very characteristic of our work, and you have to be really prepared for it. In any case, so we've got our business plan done. This is the kind of sludge we're going to focus on. We're going to keep our eye on municipal sludges, and in fact, there's one or two that we did quote on for specific reasons. Smaller volumes, easy to do, easy access. They haven't come about. Well, one has come about, the others haven't. So the second thing, and it's really more a phase two than it is a step two, is sweat equity. Boy, I'll tell you, don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to do this. There's a lot of money going out, and there's no money coming in. We don't have any equipment. We can't process, none of that. However, in our business, a couple of things that we have to do, and one is regulatory. We can't operate a unit like that, and this has been in since the mid-1980s, unless you have what is called a Ministry of Environment Certificate of Approval. It took us 6 to 8 months to get that. And when you submit something like this for regulatory to the approvals branch, the MOE, don't anticipate that they'll know what you're talking about. Now, this is not a slam against the MOE, and I'm not just being cautious here. It's just that they approve all kinds of things. And sometimes you'll get an environmental officer who's just never seen one of these systems. And if that's the case, even though there may be other descriptions on file, you end up walking them through it. And if I can give you any piece of advice on the MOE, you play absolutely straight with him. You never play games with him. You give them the absolute truth. The second thing is, and I wouldn't presume anybody in this room would do otherwise. So what did I say? Well, anyway, but the other thing is, don't be surprised if the individual doesn't know what you're talking about. And at times, one of the best pieces of advice I can give is to go down, make an appointment, go down, see the individual, and cover off any area that seems to be a problem. There is nothing like face-to-face communication. I don't care how digital we get, I don't know how YouTube we get. If you aren't doing sales and regulatory stuff from a face-to-face point of view, you're not doing your job. The other thing is, while I was focusing on the regulatory requirements and getting that done, and working on the third item on sales, I'll come back to that in a minute, somebody's got to build the equipment. My colleague is a superb engineer who has worked on any number of units, as have I, and he basically designed and put our own unit together. And our unit is a belt filter press, a 1 meter BFP that we brought from a US firm in New York State. It has processed more sludge than you can shake a stick at, and we're extremely happy with the equipment. One of the real difficulties in doing this kind of thing, in the sweat equity, is that you calling clients and saying, gee, we'd really like to do your sludge, but oh, by the way, we can't be there for 6 months. This does not go over well. Clients want to hear that you can get there and do the job for you, or do the job for them when they need you. We couldn't do that. But if you don't start introducing yourself and start getting your name out there and indicating you've got the service going, you're going to be that much further behind. So better let them know now, tell them you'll get there as soon as you can, when they're ready to have work done again, and we'll provide a bid. One of the things that's really characteristic of this kind of thing is the length of time to get a job. I don't know how you find it, but I have found consistently there's two types of work. One that comes in that's serendipitous. Somebody literally calls up and says, man, we need you tomorrow, please get here. You know, it's 300 metric tons dry solids, and if you don't do it, I'm going to be fired. And believe me, that has happened. The other is sales, sales, sales. Phone call, cold call, follow-up call, follow-up call, follow-up call. And work, if it comes, will come anywhere from 6 to 18 months after that initial call. And that is if you're lucky. It doesn't always get there. But the sooner you get sales going, the better. In any case, we ended up with our certificate of approval. Along with that, we have to take $20,000 for every unit we put on the road and give it to the Ministry of the Environment that they hold in trust and will not give back to us and without any interest until we close our company and take that unit off the road. And this is, in fact, the trailer my colleague built. This is a site up in the Bruce Peninsula, and the belt filler pass is just behind the picture in the middle of the trailer. There's another shot of that coming up. This next part is up the creek. This is a really nasty phase, and I don't know how many of you have gone through it, but if you started up your firm, I'm willing to bet you've done this yourself. So when you're up the Sludge Creek, there's 2 or 3 things going on. The trailer's built, you've been doing your sales, but you still don't have any work. Money is continuing to flow out of your pockets, and you've got to get trial operations in. So you've got to find some place to go. You've got to go in and say, let me run the unit and shake it down. If you don't do that, you're going to get a nasty surprise in the first job you go to, and you go to for real, that you're actually going to get paid. They really don't like it when you show up and you can't operate. Sales and disappearing clients. Sales continue, and as you're trying to get the trial operations done, you finally find a client. Boom, here's one. And we found just a lovely job. I won't say where, because it did not work out well, but we were very confident of getting this job, and the contact that we used with the client was very happy to have what we were offering. He was at least reasonably cognizant of what the work was about and asked some very pertinent questions about how we would process the sludge. I won't go into those now, but he clearly had a knowledge of it. And the work looked like, just as we were getting finished with trials and knowing we were ready to go, we finally had a job to get ourselves getting some revenue in the door. The job disappeared. And it disappeared to another firm who had no certificate of approval and got the work anyway and did it for about 20% less than we did. And we found out after the fact, and this is not sour grapes, I promise you, that the work was not done particularly well, and instead of taking a couple or 3 weeks, took a month or more to do. And that's why I call this up the creek. This period is really tough. When you just think you're going to first get some work at the first, and it doesn't come through, partly because they don't know you, or partly because of, we think, was inexcusable behavior on this one person. It just happens, and you've got to be able to see your way through it. The other thing that's going on at this point, of course, is we've got to start bringing in some operators and get them trained, because Udo and I couldn't do it all ourselves. And also cash flow. Money is continuing to go out the door without money coming in. As a quick comment on operators, trying to find an operator, I'm not talking a manager, I'm talking about an operator who has any sort of certification, let alone OACETT certification, which would be just golden, is almost impossible in the wastewater treatment field. And that is true for both water and wastewater. And that's another project that I'm working on. But in any case, now, out of that black cement pond with the dredge pulling sludge out to an intermediate tank, pumping it in, this is the discharge end of a belt filter press. It looks just much like a paper machine, and off comes our sludge. And this sludge will range anywhere from 20 to 40% total solids, depending on the substrate. So a straight inorganic on a municipal sludge, it's going to come out 20 to 22%. On a inorganic or primarily inorganic sludge, it's going to come out on the order of 40%. It does a very nice job. Whoa. I'm sorry, I guess there's one. Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Okay, actual clients, this is always a relief. we started getting our clients, and that has worked out very well. Part of it was the fact that we know the market very well, and there's a number of clients that repeatedly do the work, and because we've been doing it since '83, we knew a lot of them, and we just kept going back until finally we got the work. A couple of comments, pricing and margin. Predatory pricing, we run into that periodically, and it just kills you. We'd rather lose the work and not do the work rather than get the job with predatory pricing. It is just wrong. It may be illegal, I don't know, but it is just wrong. And if you're relying on predatory pricing to get going, you're going to kill yourself. You got to keep the sales going. I put this in over and over again about the sales, but if you're going to run a group, you got to do the sales. And if you're in a recession, if it's difficult in good times, and you're getting 1 out of 10 clients, 2 out of 10 clients, or 2 out of 10 clients, and you're lucky, and there's fewer places to call, but you got to call them all anyway, and you'll get fewer jobs because there's less work to do. Also, our philosophical approach towards work is, if you're going to make any money, if you're going to survive, if you're going to stay alive, repeat work is the only way to go. It's very rare that you run into one-off. The job that I mentioned earlier that we lost right at the very beginning was a one-off. That plant was never going to operate again, so it was a heartbreak. But the jobs that we have picked up since then are basically repeat work jobs. And if you do first-class work at a fair price, treat the client right, you come back for a second shot at it. The other thing that really starts to happen is you've built it, you've designed it, you've built it, you've put it together, you've shaken it down, all that kind of stuff. Now you're starting to put tons of sludge through. And all of a sudden, maintenance starts to rear its head. If you're not doing preventive maintenance, you're an idiot. So we try and do preventive maintenance. We got 2 really good operators. Udo is superb at watching our equipment, and I do my best when I'm out in the field. It's just essential. There's nothing worse than sitting there for 3 hours or 3 days not processing sludge, which is what you're making your life at, because the belt broke on the PFP and you didn't have a spare belt sitting by. Belts are expensive, but 3 days of sitting and doing nothing, that's even worse. The other thing is, how's my time? A mobile dewatering trailer, you can just see the back of it. It's the same trailer, you can just see the back of it over to the left. And we work, the primary work for this type of service is often spring, late spring, mid-spring, through to late fall, early winter. But in the last couple of years, we've worked right through the winter for a couple of clients. And 2 winters ago, this last winter was so easy, at least down in southwestern Ontario, it was a godsend to us, but 2 years ago, it was brutal out there. And when you're running a liquid sludge through a line and sending filtrate back, if you're not clearing those lines every night, you've got frozen hoses and you've got a lot of downtime. Now, the 5th phase is expansion, and we're just starting to move into that now. One of the really neat things about doing the business plan at the very beginning is that you've got this very clear focus. And we had a superb focus, and it's really worked out well for us. But in doing the work over the last 3 years in particular, as we built up work and we needed some new equipment, we found that we now use a dredge. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, where we weren't using a dredge before. I won't go into how we were getting the sludge out before. With the dredge, this new dredge is just a beauty. But we found out that there's other possible work for that dredge for pumping sludge, but not necessarily dewatering it. So now we're expanding our business plan out to start picking that up. The other thing is, because we stay in touch with a lot of firms that, sometimes we subcontract to, they have trouble doing confined space, large confined space sedimentation tanks, like at the nuclear power plants and that kind of thing, and the steel plants too. And we're just in the process of hopefully putting together a couple of proposals to do confined space. So we set our plan together, we stuck to our focus, we've established our repeat work. We did 49, we were on site 49 out of 52 weeks last year, take off 4 weeks for maintenance at least, so maybe 45 weeks of actual operation last year. And we've been operating since the 1st of January this year. So it is really starting to come for us. So now that we got that focus, established a good base of clients, we can, we can start moving to this new, to these 2 new areas as well. And this is our pride and joy. This is the same lagoon I showed you earlier. A one-man unit pumps about 1,200 imperial gallons. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, that should be in metric, shouldn't it? But in any case, it's a beautiful unit, pumps about 1,800 US gallons a minute of about a 3% sludge. Just does a great job. And I think that's it. In any case, I just want to talk to people about sludge, so I'll use any excuse I can to get up in front of people and talk about what we do. And it's a pleasure here to do it at OACETT, partly because I'd sure like to see a lot more people with OACETT certification in the water and wastewater field. So that's a bit of an aside. But for our own group, if you're looking to do your own firm or set up your own firm, timing is clearly always important, but the most important aspect of the timing is whether you're ready to take it on and whether you have the financial resources to take it on. And if you're willing to do that, put in the sweat equity, then after 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 years, hopefully the company will pay that back to you. It's a lot of work, I kid you not, but in the end it's really worthwhile, not the least of which I get to come here and talk to you. Thank you so much.
Within your business, how do you know what you're dealing with? Do you test the liquid yourself, or do you have a subcontractor, or does the company tell you what content is that you're transporting? And do you have to have a license for transporting that product?
Just an excellent question. Is this on?
Yeah, just push there, yeah.
Okay. A great point. For the most part, when a client asks us to take a look at their sludge, often it's already been sampled and characterized. And most industrial clients will have their hazardous waste classification, and we go with their classification for how we treat it. It's surprising how much non-hazardous sludge actually we do and send to non-haz landfill as well. But if we're concerned about a sludge, we definitely take a sample, and we'll arrange for the analytical work itself, the leachate test, and get that done and confirm to our own minds that that's what we're dealing with.
And on your equipment, how does that actually work? Are you scraping the bottom? Are you using vacuum? How does that actually work?
Like with the dredge?
Yes.
Actually, your analogy to a vacuum is very close. Effectively, what it is a dredge with an arm that can reach down about 15 feet from the surface. The dredge sits in about 6 inches of freeboard, so it sits very shallow. It's beautiful. And that arm will go down and pick the sludge up. And it has a front end on it, just much like a snowblower. And then we adjust that to try and pick up the heaviest sludge we can. We have to be very careful because sometimes there are liners and that kind of thing. And also some clients have a huge buildup of sludge. So we may just go down into, if they've got 6 feet, we may just go down to the first 3 or the first 4 and then take that off and then go back and take the next group off. But basically it's a pump with a snowblower auger on the front of it.
Yeah, and you do leave some sludge in it, so it does continue on its regular cycle.
Say that again?
I know typically bacteria and microorganisms are grown to control or do their job within the system. You do when you do pump, you leave so much in the system?
No, for the most part, it depends on the client. If the client specifies the quantity of sludge they want, sometimes it's only half or 3/4 of what they've got in there. And for the most part, the sludges we deal with are they're non-active. They're an inorganic base.
Yeah.
However, when we do run into an organic sludge, there's a huge emphasis of getting absolutely everything out. We're running into quotations, particularly for small communities. You're familiar with St. Andrews by the Sea in Nova Scotia. We've quoted on that, and although we unfortunately didn't get that work, I'll tell you, it was 20 years of accumulation in that lagoon. They wanted everything out. But it's a settling lagoon as opposed to a processing lagoon. And we've never been asked to do a lagoon that's actually being used as an active process, just the settling lagoons that are accumulating.
When you're dealing with different kinds of sludges, like you mentioned with nuclear power plants and stuff, do you have to modify your equipment to deal with radioactivity or versus, say, just normal biological sludge?
Actually, it's a really good question, and it's one of the real keys to the in fact, it's almost at the very heart, that and the equipment itself is at the very heart of doing a good job in the field. When we do the nuclear plants, we're basically doing their biological sludge. We're doing their, what is effectively a municipal sludge. There are biosolids that has been left basically cold anaerobic digestion, and we run that. So there's no problem from a radioactivity point of view, and we don't touch that at all. We are looking to do also their sedimentation tanks for their water treatment. But coming back to your question more directly, one of the real keys is being able to modify your conditioning agents to meet your sludge. We often, as a general rule or rule of thumb, we often use a cationic polymer, and then we'll do a variation on that: low charge, high charge, long chain, short chain, that kind of thing. And as long as we've got that range in there, we've got a good starting point. But every now and then, unless you've got some sophistication with some chemistry, you're going to run into trouble. And we did a forest sludge in New Brunswick about 7 years ago. And because it had sat in the lagoon so long, basically all the particulate was out of it. And so we ended up going to ferric chloride as a pre-addition for essentially for precipitation, followed by a polymer, and then ran across the press. Once you get to know a sludge from a responsible client, you're pretty safe using almost the same polymer each time, but it really does change a lot from site to site. And like I said, as a general rule, we get away with cationic and sometimes a coagulant, occasionally an anionic. Is that clear? Or?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Thank you.
One final question, Ahmad.
Yeah. Foremost, it was a beautiful way of understanding the sludge part of it, as to be honest, it was quite new to me. But while John was presenting, a thought came to me, and which is very serious for those who are in the area of construction of dams, civil dams which are there. Now, the problem with the civil dams, which I recall from my days of engineering sciences, that they are primarily designed for 100 to 100 years. Over a period of time, as the catchment area is there, the mud with the water is coming up, and effectively the catchment area for the water is decreasing phenomenally, let me tell you. As a result, the overall efficiency of these dams, they decrease. Now, when John was presenting, the question which coming to me was that, can I use this particular technique or these principles to take out the mud which is coming and settling down in the dams, which is the need of not one country, but probably globally? I'd like to hear from John on that. Thanks.
That is nobody's brought that up before. But in fact, we've addressed it once before. It's a really good question, and I go back so far now, but I think it was in the early 1990s, 1980 or late 1980s. A small dam had a problem. Again, it was in about mid-Ontario, the near north, and there was a problem with sediment buildup behind the dam. And we ended up bidding on that work to pull the sediment out from behind, run it through a dewatering unit, produce a cake, and get that shipped off site. I think it's a superb use for a dredge, particularly on the smaller units. On larger units, I think it's going to be a bit more difficult, but on larger dams it is. But unfortunately, we didn't get the job, so I can't give you an example of one that we actually did. But we have bid on work like that. But since 1983, we've only bid on it once. But anybody who's familiar with the rivers that empty into Lake Erie, and I'm not sure about the rest of the Great Lakes, but they're all silted up. And with Project Ojibwa, the Ojibwa submarine coming into Port Burwell, Ontario, which is where I live, they're going to have to bring a dredge down and pull that material out. But the material they're pulling out, they're going to dredge it so that they can bring in the barge, but then they're going to put that further out in the lake. So they're just going the one step, and that is removing the sediment, but not dewatering it or taking it away. Thank you.
John, thank you for sharing your experience in starting EnviroSite with us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.